Welcome to the Early Career Professionals in Mapping webinar series. The American Geosciences Institute has partnered with the National Cooperative Geologic Mapping Program to highlight the work of early career geoscience professionals, especially as it relates to the use and production of geologic maps. Each webinar will begin with a presentation from an early career professional, followed by an interview and then a live Q&A session with the speaker. Today's webinar features Dr. Madeline Kelley, who will speak about her current role as a research associate in geography and geomorphology with the University of New Orleans, in addition to other professional experiences she has had in the geosciences and with mapping.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining me today as we talk about using, making, and sharing maps, the many different ways to work with maps. My name is Madeline Kelley. I'm really excited to get to share a little bit about my life and career with you today. I've always enjoyed spending time outside and learning about the earth. At the same time, I've also really enjoyed learning about and using technology and computers. I didn't really know what I wanted to study when I first started university in Pittsburgh. I switched my major a couple of times from music theory to education to anthropology, but finally found environmental studies. While I was working on my bachelor's degree there, I started learning about geography, geology, cartography, and geographic information science. It's pretty common for scientists like me to have traveled a lot for work and school, and so here's a little bit of my personal map. I started off in Pittsburgh and moved from Denver to Phoenix, and now I'm in New Orleans as a research associate at the University of New Orleans. I've gotten to also work with many wonderful people on many different projects, and at different times I've had lots of different job titles. Some of those titles include scientist, geomorphologist, field paleontologist, GIS analyst, and even floodplain mapping specialist. So today, when people ask me about what I do, I tell them I'm a geographer and a geomorphologist who studies the surface of the earth, particularly sandy places like rivers, beaches, and deserts. Today I'm going to talk to you about some of the different projects that I've had the great opportunity to work on, in hopes that sharing my experience with you will give you some new ideas of what's possible in terms of jobs that involve making, using, and sharing maps. But before we get started today, I just want to briefly talk about and explain the similarities and differences between a few words that you may have heard before. Geoscience, geology, geography, geomorphology, and geographic information science, sometimes abbreviated GIS. All of these can be grouped within the study of earth science or geoscience, which is the fields of natural science that are related to planet Earth. Geology is all about the structure of the earth, both on and beneath its surface, and the processes that have shaped the earth's structure. Geography is really an all-encompassing discipline that studies the earth, both human and the human and natural complexities, but it's not just merely where objects are. Geographers study study places and spaces and how they've developed and how they continue to change. Geomorphology is the study of landforms, and is the way the way that they're influenced by geology and climate and people. So geomorphologists work on projects that overlap a lot with physical geography, geology, and engineering. Last but not least, GIS is focused on combining the fields of geoscience and geography with computer technology, with a real focus on mapping and the analysis of spatial data. The Earth is made up of a lot of different components. Scientists often like to separate them out, like the geosphere, the hydrosphere, the biosphere, and the atmosphere shown here. And so some of the job and project examples that I'm going to talk about today might not directly have geology or rock data on them, but they involve earth science and thus involve geology indirectly. So for example, certain projects might be focused on vegetation or water or people and communities. In the real world, it's hard to separate these different variables or different layers because everything is always interacting and constantly changing. So I hope that after today, you can see the many, many different career paths that you can take with an education in geography, geosciences, and mapping. So some jobs required me to use other people's maps. Other times, I've been asked to make new maps for projects. As well as sometimes the focus of the project is sharing maps or data, which doesn't always mean just printing out paper maps. Sometimes we need more interactive maps or online tools. And so I'm going to go through some examples of using, making, and sharing maps that I've had with my career. So let's start off with using maps, projects that involved relying on maps that other people have made. So while this isn't a job, lots of people just use maps for hobbies in everyday life, and I bet you have too. Maybe finding directions to a new restaurant or estimating the driving time to go visit some family. Some of my first memories using maps were with my family, walking or hiking or riding around local parks. I've always loved just looking at maps to see how long different trails were, if there was going to be a stream crossing or some other fun sight to see. So here's just an example of a map that I used growing up of from my park near my family's home. But as a geomorphologist today, I study how the surface of the earth changes over time. Lots of times I'm studying a beach. I'm out on the beach trying to measure how much sand is moving, how that environment is changing due to maybe human activities or changing climate. Before I decide where I want to set up my field equipment, I check lots of different maps to understand that location, that study site. On the left are two examples of field experiments that I was a part of. So it's often that we have lots of equipment, so we want to make sure that we put it in the right space and that the equipment will be safe, that it won't get washed away or blown away. On the right, here's a beautiful beach in the Outer Banks, North Carolina. If I was getting ready to study this beach, I'd start by first searching for previous maps of the area. Different federal and state government groups often publish maps that you can get that show you the elevation of the area, also about the surface and subsurface rocks nearby. These maps also often show roads and vegetation information. I'm also interested in the climate of the region though, and also the ocean patterns. So in addition to geology maps, I need data on air and water temperature as well as wind speed and direction. So here's an example of a really awesome interactive map that I've used previously. Here you can see the wind direction, the air temperature, and then you can even switch over to information about the ocean, such as the waves, the dominant height of the waves, and the angle that they're coming on shore. So I spend lots of times reading maps about present day conditions, but also trying to understand future predictions. In the past, I've also worked as a field paleontologist. My job was surveying, which really means walking around, exploring, taking notes about different areas to check for rocks that may contain fossils, like the one I'm holding in the picture. It's a little fish fossil there. We do this to protect the fossils because they're important keys to understanding Earth's history. If a development project is happening, like building a road, it was our job to check the area for potential important fossils. To do my job, I often relied on maps that were made by the USGS Geological Survey, which is a federal organization, or various state geologic surveys to help understand the geology of the areas before I went out to survey. Maps like this show you about the rocks in the area, and they were made by other geologists. So here I'm zooming in, and maybe I'm going to survey that area of the map, and by the color and the label, I can go to the legend and then read up about more of what rocks are going to be in that area, and that helps me to be as prepared as possible before I go out into the field. All right, so let's talk about making maps. Making maps is both a science and an art. You want them to be true and have good information, but they need to be readable as well. So it's often a balance between those many different things. Also, while I was a field paleontologist, I worked as a GIS analyst for that same company, meaning I did both field work and then came back to the office to do the computer work. In the office, I would transfer or enter in the data that I collected while I was out surveying. And oftentimes I would have to first organize it, get it ready, and then I could do further analysis depending on what questions I was asking. A big part of my job was generating survey reports and maps. Maps like this one. Here's an example. Often I would need to show a project area, like shown here in red, as well as add some geology information. Here it's shown as a pink polygon of the certain sandstone rock that I was interested in. Also, I would add the locations of the fossils that I had found, or maybe some other important findings that I saw out in the field, which are shown by the yellow stars. These maps would help other companies with their construction plans to make sure that they were following the federal or state laws to protect important fossils or cultural sites in areas. Working as a geomorphologist often involves making maps once you've collected new data or completed a research project. Lots of times I'm mapping changes of the Earth's surface. Maybe it's change of vegetation, like you see on the photo on the left, where there used to be vegetation closer to the stream, but now there's some actually that's been removed right in front of where the photographer was standing. Or sometimes I'm thinking about changes of a beach elevation, where we have the dune or the beach is decreasing due to erosion, as you can see in the photo on the right. That big arrow is showing you where a gully has formed and erosion has taken away a bunch of that portion of the sand dune. We can compare data from different years using GIS to understand why and how different changes occurring on the surface of the Earth. I got to be a part of a really cool project that was led by an undergrad student at Arizona State University named Michaela Roberts. She used computer software called ArcPro to analyze changes in floodplains and stream paths, their location over time. And this was focused on the Verde River within the Tonto National Forest in Arizona between 1958 and 2018. And here is her results map, where she was able to estimate the old location of the river from 1958 data shown in pink and compare it to the current day location shown in the darker purple. And her results supported what some others have found, that there's been a decrease in floodplain area in this part of the national forest. As a floodplain mapping specialist, I've had the opportunity to work for the state of Colorado, the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Floods are a very common and widespread natural hazard across the globe, and flood hazard mapping is aimed to reduce flood loss and improve future development from really tragic events like the one you can see here. This is in Boulder, Colorado, 2013. Many states and local communities work with mapping specialists like me and engineers to model or predict where flooding will occur, and make maps like this to help inform people. Part of my job was to collect the data that we needed to make these predictions or calculations. These calculations need data from all different environmental factors. Some of those include the precipitation patterns, the watershed area, land cover types, the information on the soil, the river channel shape, and vegetation. Once we finish our analysis, then I would work on making the final map products, which have to follow really strict and specific guidelines and rules before we can share them with the public. Lastly, I have some really fun projects I would love to share with you that are all about sharing maps in unique ways. Lots of times just printing a paper map doesn't do the best job of communicating your results or really tell the story that you want people to understand. And nowadays we work mostly with digital maps, which opens up a lot of doors for doing really creative projects. For example, my job today as a geomorphologist focuses on understanding how sand moves in rivers. Here are two pictures that show different rivers where you can see below the water there's sand and the formation of dunes and ripples. The sand is moving down the river with the water. Knowing where and how much sand is moving is important for a lot of reasons, like boat navigation, building dams, building bridges, as well as wildlife habitat. And so I'd like to show you a series of maps as movies. Here you can see underwater dunes that are going to move from left to right over the course of about 30 minutes. And from these videos, I can use cool computer software to help me actually track and measure that dune movement, which here is shown by green arrows. And sometimes I even zoom in even more and map the individual movement or the movement of individual sand grains. And so here you'll start to see little squiggly lines appear in the video, and these are actually me tracking individual sand grains as they move along the bed of a river. I think that both the dunes and the sand grain videos just look beautiful. Now these aren't standard maps, but they help me measure and share this really cool data with other people. Also, back when I was a floodplain mapping specialist in Colorado, a big part of my job was sharing data. Lots of people use interactive online maps to see data, to explore it, and then to possibly download it and to use it for their projects. Here's an example of some of that data that I helped maintain and share. This is an interactive map that's easy for anyone to use. And they can look and see what the new results are, if there was increases or decreases to the flood zone in their area. While I love numbers, data, and maps, I know not everyone does as much as me. And lots of times I went to community meetings to answer people's questions about flood maps like the one you're looking at here. Sometimes it's hard to understand the colors and the labels and what they mean in real life. And I had an idea to combine science and art together. What if people could share stories and pictures from a previous flood event like the one you're seeing here? And this might help people connect what the data that they're looking at on a map really means in their community and help them be prepared if another flood occurs. So during my master's at the University of Denver, I made this web GIS. And this is an example of an online geographic information system that's aimed to better assist individuals and communities in communicating and understanding their flood risks. So here I combine flood maps, community knowledge, all within an easy-to-use web application. So the first thing that people could do when they're in my web map is zoom around to their neighborhood. I only did this for one pilot area, but they could click on a structure or a building and start putting in information on it. Was it a one-story house? Does it have a basement? Then it would auto-populate the assessed building value, and then they could start to understand what the predicted damage would be for a flood that had a 1-foot depth or 2-foot flood, and start to understand what the real cost of a flood would be to their home. And then also sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I wanted people to be able to share information. Like here someone had added that their basement had flooded during a previous event. Or here I'm pulling in social media pictures to show what that damage really looked like to the road in that area. With all this information together, I really hope that my interactive map would be able to communicate or share better the information about flooding to help to protect the community. The last fun sharing map example I would like to leave you with today is all about connecting communities and supporting artists. I was lucky enough to volunteer with a group of high school students who wanted to help support local artists and share their amazing art throughout their town. So over the course of a weekend, we had about 5 high school students get together and were able to make this biking art tour of their town, really just mostly using their cell phones. What we did was just went around to the different murals that the students liked and collected GPS locations and took pictures of the art. And then we came back to the office and created this fun web map that anyone in the community could use, really like Google Maps, to go check out the local artwork. We also pulled in some different bike routes so that if people wanted to bike to these locations instead of drive, that it was easier for them to be able to do that. And it was just a really fun experience overall. So thank you so much for joining me today. Hopefully I surprised you a little bit with the wide range of possibilities that are available to people who study the geosciences and mapping. My favorite part about my job is definitely the variety of projects I've been able to work on that use my skills in geography, geology, GIS, and geomorphology. Thanks so much again.
Maddie, thank you for sharing how you use, make, and share maps with us. Lindsay and I are excited to talk more about these projects, your experiences in geoscience in general today. I'll start off by first asking that you mentioned that when you first started college, you switched majors a few times and finally landed on environmental science. I'm wondering what exactly kept you there and how does environmental science differ from geology?
Well, first of all, thank you all for having me. I'm really happy to be here today. So I think that ultimately what kept me in environmental science, like the geosciences in general, was just my love of studying the earth and being outside and all the many different research options and careers that I realized that were available with a kind of a degree on that path. I liked that it combined lots of different like other sciences like chemistry and biology, even physics. Um, and also, when I was switching majors a lot, I was having a hard time feeling like I fit in anywhere. And it was really nice that one of my advisors, Mark Collins at the University of Pittsburgh, just like really was kind and took the time to explain things and really made me feel at home. So having a good mentor was a big part of staying with environmental science.
I think a lot of people can probably relate to that.
Yeah.
So you can tell us more about the work that you're doing now with the University of New Orleans.
Yeah, so now for the last like 5 years or so, I've been pretty obsessed with sand, how it moves by wind and water. And so at the University of New Orleans with Robert Mann, we're conducting some experiments, both at the University of New Orleans and with some awesome folks at the University in Santa Barbara, Bonsi Ganti. And so we're interested in better understanding how sand moves in rivers, not just how it moves downstream, but also how it moves left and right across the stream. So we've set up some cool experiments in what's called a flume. It's an indoor river. And we use cameras and lasers to actually track the individual sand particles, but also dunes, which are really just like big piles of sand that move along the bottom of the river. And so this helps us think about how rivers, real rivers in nature respond when we get a big rain event, if we have flooding, just understanding how sediment transport changes with the changing river conditions.
And you talked about how you did things with flood risk management, things like that. Is this at all related to that? Could this be used for that assessment?
Well, it's not directly related, but it's definitely indirectly related. As a flood occurs, the river itself changes. Obviously, it gets filled up with water, but the amount of sediment also changes. So understanding how these dunes respond to flood conditions is important when you're starting to do flood mapping. But when I was working for the Colorado Water Conservation Board as a flood mapping specialist, really I was helping more be like the middle person between the engineers that do the hydraulic modeling and helping like collect all the data that they need. And helping manage all that GIS data and as well as like going to different communities that we were helping do the new flood maps for and explaining what the data was, explaining the maps to them. Because sometimes it's confusing. It's definitely confusing to see new data, especially when for some places maybe the maps weren't done since the 70s, and so you can see like a lot of changes in multiple decades. So it's definitely related. It's but a little bit different at the same time.
And Maddie, you talked about floodplain maps. We'd love to hear more about those floodplain maps. How are areas chosen for flood risk mapping? Can you just speak more about that? Because it sounds pretty in-depth and complex. If you can share a little more.
Yeah, thanks for the great question. So it is definitely complex. So in the U.S., we have FEMA, which is the National Flood Insurance. It manages the National Flood Insurance Program. Oftentimes there's a state or local organization that works with FEMA to help get those flood maps done. Sometimes they're done because we know that we just need a new map. Like it's too old. The last time the modeling was done doesn't really reflect where flooding occurs now. And sometimes that occurs through different programs, like they have a community assistance program. So it really depends. A lot of it has to do with funding. It's not cheap to redo flood maps if you want really good ones, which we do, especially for FEMA, where that's what they rely on for insurance purposes. So there's not just one way that they get redone, but it kind of depends on the community, the state, and a couple of different factors.
And how are those maps shared out? Is it or like flood risk map communication in general? Can you speak more about that? How it's shared with the public?
Yeah. So at least for our group in Colorado, whenever we would be doing a new flood map, we would work very closely with the communities and have multiple meetings where we would bring the maps, whether it be a paper map or we would project the maps up on a projector or television and let people look at them. This is while we're still doing the mapping, because sometimes it takes a while to get the modeling right. Maybe we didn't have the right data before, and so we're going to do a second draft and then come back to the community and show them our results. But once it's all done, then it has to be like formally approved by FEMA. They have very strict standards to be, adopted as an official FEMA map, a firm. And so they'll review that. And now FEMA has a great online database where you can go and type in your address or just, scroll around like you're on Google Maps and find what your map is. You can either download a PDF or download the GIS data so that you can make your own map. But yeah, now it's all in an online portal trying to make it easier for people to access that data.
I know when I was buying a house last year, it was looking at, okay, are we in a floodplain? Great. What does FEMA have to say about my new location? So I know that not just geomorphologists and geoscience people are using it. It's really useful for the public as well. So
yeah, that's the goal. We want it to be useful. Maps should be made for the people that use them.
Well, thinking about that, what considerations do you take into account when you're making the maps or preparing maps?
Oh, that's a good question, and it always depends on the map and the project. I think that the longer that, at least for me, the longer I take planning and thinking and asking questions on like, what is the purpose of this map? Thinking about the who, what, where, when, why, how of what that final product needs to do. The longer I take thinking about that results in a better map. And then you got to think about, well, okay, I want to show this data, but does that data exist already? Do I have time to go out and collect it in the field if I really need it? Can I use someone else's data that maybe not be perfect, but will serve its purpose? So there's a lot of just planning, like any kind of project that you would do at school or at work. And then oftentimes, especially if you're using someone else's data, they probably collected it for a different purpose. And so it takes time to clean it, meaning just to like make sure it's ready for your map. It might not be organized the same way. So sometimes maps can be making the map itself can be pretty quick, maybe just like a day or two. But oftentimes collecting or organizing the data for your map and planning everything out, the analysis part can take a long time. Like sometimes it takes months or even years to do that. But mostly for like my job right now, we'll run an experiment in the lab and collect some cool data. It'll take me like a month maybe to make sure it's all ready to go on the map, and then I can create beautiful maps and figures for either conferences or papers that I'm writing. And it's that step doesn't take too long. So, yeah.
And Maddie, you mentioned obviously all the different components of map making that you consider. How did you learn how to make maps at this level? Has it been kind of a gradual process? Has it been experience, workshops, PDs? Can you just talk more about how you became the expert you are today?
Thanks. Yeah, a lot of it was in school, and I think it was why I liked my program at the University of Pittsburgh. GIS, Geographic Information Systems, or Geographic Information Science, was just starting to become pretty big, which is just mapping with computers. And I had always really liked using computers. So having the opportunity to like take classes on rocks and the atmosphere, as well as this cool tool for organizing and analyzing all that data, that's where I learned a lot at first. Taking classes that taught you about different software, like maybe some of the ESRI software like ArcPro, or coding like using Python or MATLAB. There's lots of different software that you can start off with. But then quickly you realize that for every job, for every project, you need like slightly different skills, and you bring what you already know, but then you learn what you need to know. And so I feel like with every project, I've learned something new, whether it's like maybe it's learning a new language, like coding in a new language, or maybe it's learning how to analyze a different data set. But I think it's like okay to not know, you're not supposed to know everything when you start on a project. A lot of that learning is part of the process.
I'm sure that's comforting for people to hear that they don't have to know everything going into the job. But you also talked about some equipment that you use while you're in the lab. Can you talk about those types of equipment or out in the field even, and what they do and how they help you with your work?
Yeah, definitely. So it depends on obviously what I'm doing. As you probably saw in the talk, I've done lots of different projects. But generally speaking, we need spatial data. Where is either an object or a feature on the Earth? And so a lot of this has to do with GPS or GNSS data. And those are the satellite constellations that are orbiting our Earth. And they give you the X, Y, Z in time of different points. So you can go out in the field with different GPS equipment to collect point data. So if I'm like out, mapping fossils, maybe I need to write down the location of where that fossil was. Maybe I am out trying to map where a gully, a new like river channel has appeared. And so maybe I'll take a couple points of where that new erosional feature is. And those are all like normally really just like relatively small. They've gotten smaller over the years, handheld devices that you can go out with. Depending on how accurate you need it to be, they tend to get a little bit bigger. Like if it's okay, if my data point is a meter or two off, then you can even just use your cell phone a lot of times. But if I need to know it's like the millimeter scale where something was, then oftentimes you need like a professional GPS equipment, which takes a little bit more training, but they're not hard to learn how to use. And then another really useful piece of equipment that we've used for different projects is a terrestrial laser scanner. Sometimes they're just called TLS. Maybe you've heard of LiDAR before, and it's using those laser beam pulses. It's sending out like a cloud of them. So it goes out from the device and it hits whatever it hits, like the surface of the earth. Maybe I'm mapping a dune. And so it'll hit wherever the earth is. And then when it comes back, that instrument collects all those point locations. So when I go back into the office, it's like a large point cloud. I'll use that information to map different features. Lots of times we're also just taking out tablets or cameras, even old-fashioned notebooks to write down things. They're called write in the rain notebooks. Maybe I'll take out some sample bags if I'm wanting to collect sand. But we use lots of instruments too in the lab. Like I mentioned, the high-speed cameras, and similarly to TLS, it's like a laser system that scans the bed of our indoor river. So yeah, those are some of the common instruments that I've used over my career.
So you mentioned indoor river, so that's a model kind of system similar to what you're looking at in the field?
Exactly. Yeah, and we use models because it makes it a lot simpler to focus on like certain variables. It's always good, to then go out into the field and test our theories. But sometimes you just need to focus on a couple different variables, and so lab experiments and models help us explore those a lot easier, and it's a lot easier to repeat. Yeah.
Awesome. And you briefly talked about fossils just now, and I want to jump back to that portion of your talk because you talked about the use of maps to protect important fossils, but what makes a fossil be classified as important?
Yeah. So first of all fossils are important. I don't want to say that some fossils are more important than others. But for different projects or for different reasons, we might, as humans, like be more interested in preserving some or others. For example, fossils give us a lot of information about Earth's past. And so if we haven't had the chance to study them yet, we don't really want to destroy them. So those are what I mean by important fossils. So when we have, when I was working for that company, when we would get a job to go do some surveying work to check for important fossils, that's what we would be looking for.
Great. And you mentioned obviously the use of these maps. You mentioned construction companies can check the maps. Can you speak more about how they might use it, or others also, what other uses there are of those maps?
Yeah, great question. So the reason that we were that company existed really, what the point of the surveying work was, is that different states throughout the US have different rules on construction that can happen both on public and private land. And so really we were there because a construction project had been proposed. But really we'd be like working for the state of California for their like geologic office, doing some extra work to help them like confirm that there weren't important fossils there. So we would always like give our data to whether it's the BLM or the Forest Service, give our findings to them as well as the company. And so all those offices, would have that data as well. And so it's really important for them to keep building their data sets. Different researchers will use that information. They normally eventually make it public, but sometimes it just takes a little bit of time to like check and make sure this isn't like really sensitive or important information, or something that we need to study a little bit more before it's ready to be on a web map for everyone to look at. So there's normally it's that data is used for lots of different future research projects.
So obviously marking fossils is important because most of us love fossils. Can't not, right? But what other important markers might you add to maps? Like especially when you were working as a GIS analyst, what else might people be looking for that you would want to put on there?
Yeah. So let's say I'm trying to show someone where to go see a cool feature. Maybe it's a fossil, maybe it's a beautiful waterfall, or a pretty hike. It could really be anything. People are going to want to know, how do I get there? So roads are really important. Other data sets, which seem simple, but lots of times if you put old data, maybe it's showing that a road is there and now it's not, or vice versa, that can be pretty problematic. But in addition to just like helpful navigation things, I'm often thinking about like what other data is going to be helpful for the map reader. Do they want to know about streams in the area? Do they want to know about just like the mapped geology? Like I can add those layers in as well. Maybe they want to know where homes are. Maybe they want to know the land ownership so that they don't accidentally go on private land when they're not supposed to be there. Things like that. So it definitely depends on the project, but those are some of the common things that I'm thinking about when I would be making maps of like what else would be helpful for the person who wants to use this map.
Well, one of the really cool projects that you talked about was where you combined science and art. So you had the students going and mapping the different art around the city. Is it common to be able to do projects like that?
I love doing them, so I try to find them. Actually, that project was the idea of my friend Chelsea Romanello, who's a great artist and was working for Art Street. And I think we had this idea over tacos, actually. Um, and she was working at Art Street and had these great after school programs for art students in the city of Denver, and really wanted them to get some experience with GIS. And so came up with that idea, and after a lot of planning, was able just to really do it in a weekend. The students were super motivated to learn something new, and we just did it with their cell phones. We didn't need too much fancy technology. And they loved that they got to go out and take pictures of other artists and learn about those artists too, to like make nice write-ups for the captions, and really feel like they were creating something that was like useful for their community, that highlights other people's beautiful art and encourages people to walk around and explore those places and maybe visit some other shops while they're out walking around.
That project is so inspiring because it really does engage people in honestly geography, right? Where are things located? And so bringing them into the geosciences from a different avenue. And so I wonder what advice you have for students or professionals who might want to make a map like this or participate in a project like this.
Yeah, I think that it's getting easier and easier to do it. That you don't necessarily have to have a bachelor's or a master's or a PhD. There's a lot of fun mapping tools and tutorials online that you can kind of get started right now in high school or even earlier. I actually was able to do a fun mapping project with my nieces and nephews who are only, well, at the time they were all under 10. And so I think, yeah, the first thing is, and probably the hardest thing is just getting started, because it can seem a little intimidating, like, oh, I couldn't make a map or I couldn't go collect this data. But you can. And the second piece of advice is, if you don't know how to do it, I bet someone else does. I bet that they would love to partner with you on this project. Like exactly what happened with my friend Chelsea. She's a great artist and knew all the cool art around town. Didn't know at the time how to do a GIS project. But partnering and working with people has always been a big draw to this field for me. All the different projects and different people that I have the opportunity to work with. So I think that, it's finding those people. Maybe it seems a little bit hard at first, but I encourage you just to reach out and try.
So it sounds like you're kind of already touching on this, but what do you believe to be your key moments or experiences that have led to where you are now?
Oh, well, I think that obviously like working hard at school is important, but I think it's easy to work hard when you really like what you're doing. Obviously, you're going to take classes that at the time you're not going to love. Maybe it's calc, but later, but it becomes easier, to be really motivated and work hard when you really love what you do. And so it took me a long time to figure out what I wanted to do. School became a lot easier once I felt like I was doing what I wanted to do, that I was learning about things that I was interested in. And even when I had to take classes that I didn't like, I realized how they could apply and help me in the future and just to get through them. But other than that, I think it's just surrounding yourself with good people. I love my job. I'm passionate about it, and sometimes it's hard for me to leave work at work. I love talking about it at home with my partner, and I'm always thinking about my projects on the weekends. And so it's important for me to work with people that are nice, that are positive, and really support creating an inclusive work environment. Because you can always teach someone more math or teach them new coding, but it's pretty hard to teach empathy and kindness. And so as you get started, taking classes at college or anywhere, I think just really seeking out good people and surrounding yourself with good people is always going to help you in the long run.
That's great, Maddie. Thank you for that. And I think we have time for one last question. And one of my favorite questions to ask to wrap up these interviews is what next? What's on board for Maddie, and where do you see yourself going from here?
Oh, I have lots of options. More Sandy science for sure. I'm loving my postdoc right now, but it'll be ending in a little bit. So not sure exactly which next position will be. But at this point, I feel like I'm really just like getting started and getting to work on the projects that I love the most, that I wanted to do, the research questions and the potential collaborations that I've been thinking about for a long time. Just more science at this point. That's the only answer I can give you. I'm not sure exactly where that'll be yet, though.
Great. Thanks, Maddie, so much. And thank you again for today, talking with Lindsay and I about just your science, your background, experiences in geoscience. It's been very helpful for us, and I'm sure informative for everyone listening. So now we are going to kick it over to ourselves live, and we will be taking questions now from the audience.
All right, we'll now move into our discussion session where Maddie can answer questions from the audience, and we do have a few in the chat, and then Lauren and I will share them out. So the first question has to do with the need for web building and software experience to build interactive maps. So you did talk a little bit about your experience with that and how you got that experience, but is there a little bit more that you might add to that, like tips such as, a program that might be good for someone just starting out?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Lindsay, and thanks, Glenn, for the question, because it's a really good one. There's a lot of difference between like doing spatial analysis and creating different map products, whether it be a paper map that you're making a PDF, or you're wanting to develop a web site or a web application. And so I think more and more GIS and geography programs at universities do incorporate more lessons and classes that involve, like HTML or C++ coding. That's like really more specific for web applications and websites into their courses. But there's lots of resources too online to get started with that. I had a little bit of help with some of my advisors at the University of Denver when I was learning, but a lot of what I learned was really just from going online and looking for different discussion boards on how did you do this? I have this project. Any recommendations for me as I start this project? So for me, it was a little bit of it took a little bit of time to learn a little bit more about website development and web applications versus just like the statistics classes that I had taken in the past to help me with spatial analysis. But yeah, there's definitely a difference to that. And I think that's a great thing too to think about as you start and you become interested in mapping. Like, what are you more interested in? Are you more interested in the data analysis? Are you more interested in creating those beautiful web applications? And that'll help you really fine tune and select the different courses and maybe internship opportunities that would be most beneficial for you. Because you don't need to be good at everything. And that's why oftentimes GIS departments will have lots of different people with different specialties. So it's a great question.
Great, thanks, Maddie. And a similar question in the chat was, how many years of math and science do you feel is needed on average for folks who want to pursue similar disciplines that you have under your belt?
Again, a great question. Some people love math and some people don't. And I think GIS in particular is a great place for folks that maybe don't really want to take a ton of like the more advanced math classes. I mean, a lot of people I've met are brilliant and have taken more advanced math. And when you do more analysis stuff, but if you are a little bit more interested in just the cartography side, really like your statistics classes are going to be super helpful. And those often tend to be like a little bit easier for most folks, or more interesting for most folks, but that's not always the case. I know everyone's different. So it really depends. I think that it's great to take calc classes. I think it's great to take physics classes if you can. I think it's great to take statistics classes as well. But it is the geosciences, especially when you are going down a more like cartography or GIS career path. There's a lot of variability and a lot of different people that have really different skills. So don't let a fear or aversion to math or science like initially make you think that this career wouldn't work for you.
Great, thank you. And there's a little bit of conversation in the chat about ground penetrating radar and its utility, and people wondering if that's something that you use in map making.
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually don't have any experience with that, but I know a lot of people that do. And some folks that use it more for research purposes or more for environmental consulting groups. It looks like there's some like Alex already provided some like great examples on using it for more concrete when you have like concrete that you need to penetrate through or different bedrock conditions. So thanks for everyone responding in the chat. That is not my area of specialty. I tend to stick with superficial geology and what's going on at the surface. And so I just haven't had much experience with the ground penetrating data.
Great, thanks, Maddie. And our last question right now in the chat is, are there any rules to making a map look nice, such as color schemes, standard layouts, and of course, obviously budgets help. But yeah, can you give us more information about how you tend to make maps look nice?
Yes, you will learn in like your first cartography classes that there are rules of things that like must be on your maps, like a title, like a legend, like a scale bar. But as you become a more experienced cartographer and you have different projects, you start to bend the rules a little bit, and you start to think beyond those rules as well. But you know, color schemes is a great point because color schemes, you know, for lots of different folks, maybe they're color blind or color impaired. You really need to think about, can people tell the difference of the colors that you're selecting? There's different color schemes that the colors either are on a ramping scale, like maybe blue, light blue to dark blue, or maybe they're diverging colors going from blue to red. Or maybe they're all just different colors on your color bar. And so those tend to mean different things to different viewers, but oftentimes that can be very culturally specific. The color blue can mean different things to different cultures. And so it's in your first cartography class, you'll learn like these like standard rules, like make sure you have a scale bar so people know what they're looking at. But then you realize it gets a lot more complex. It really depends on what the project is trying to focus on, and who's going to be reading your map. So great question.
Sounds like a lot of things to consider. All right. So then you mentioned that you've been involved in a fieldwork component and also on the computer side of things. Can you talk where your particular interests lie? Like, is that something that you expected to do? And do most people in your position typically do both?
Oh, most people I work with at least do a little bit of both. But it depends on whether or not like you're more interested in research and like working at a university, or if you want to be in consulting and working for a private group, or somewhere in between, like at a state or federal organization. I like doing both because I like changing it up and getting to sometimes get like deep into data analysis on my computer, but also I enjoy being outside. So I like to have a little bit of balance between the two. But some people, don't prefer that or prefer to mainly be outside and have as little time in front of a computer as possible. So I think there's lots of different options. I think it is better in a sense, like in terms of job opportunities, if you can do at least a little bit of both. But I think that there's lots of different jobs that require less or more of either field or computer time.
Great. And then going back to map layout really quick, we have a question in the chat asking if you have any recommendations for web-based tools to check for accessibility in web-based map apps.
Oh, that's a good question. And I don't have one off the top of my head, but I have used in the past, there's a website, particularly when it comes to color and color schemes. It was called Color Brewer. The website might have changed. So I can try and look that up for you. But it would provide great recommendations for different color schemes and like let you check things that were like make sure that it's friendly for like a monitor versus like printing it out, or if it's if this is going to be viewable by someone with a color blindness or color sensitivity. So I know that there are more out there. It's been a little bit since I've checked for one, and specifically for the web-based maps, but great question. Yeah.
All right, another question in the chat, is GIS a separate discipline of study from surveying?
Yeah, great question. Yes, and if you mean surveying, like in terms of like the geologic surveying, yes. Oftentimes, if you really want to be to do surveying for either a state or a federal organization, you need a geology degree. And you often become like a professional geologist. You take an exam to pass and show that you're a professional geographer, kind of like an engineering degree. License, and oftentimes you get either like a minor or just take a couple classes or even a certificate in GIS to help with that side. But for the state and federal organizations that are like kind of our top organizations in the U.S. to be collecting and checking our geology data, oftentimes those folks have geology degrees first and foremost. But lots of times to work at those organizations, they have different people that also specialize in GIS. So if you want to be a surveyor, like for geologic surveying, maybe think about that. How much school do you want to go to? Because oftentimes you can just get a certificate in GIS and get an entry-level position, or you can go on. People get PhDs also in GIS disciplines. So it's a little bit of think about what you want to be doing. Are you the person who wants to check the rocks and be the expert on the rocks and make some maps? Or do you want to be the person who's more skilled at making those web application tools, making those different maps? But it also helps to have just like a couple classes in geology at that point. So great question. And I see Sierra put the link to the Color Brewer, and I think that is the correct link. And I've used that in the past as well. Thanks for sharing that.
Great, thanks so much, Maddie. I think that's all the time that we have today, as I see we have 1 minute remaining. So if you have additional questions for us or yours was not answered in the chat, you can email us and we will forward our questions along to Maddie for you. Within the next week, the recording for this will be posted on both our AGI website as well as our YouTube channel, and we will notify all attendees once that recording is available. Thank you so much, Maddie, for sharing your insight and time with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
And then our final spring webinar in the Early Career Professionals and Mapping series will be on March 13th. Aaron Lyons, a contractor with the USGS, will discuss techniques for mapping the sea floor. View more details about the talk and register using the link in the chat. And if you are an early career professional in mapping or know someone who is, please encourage them to apply to be a speaker in this ongoing series. Applications are now open for the fall 2024 speakers. Visit the link in the chat for more information. And finally, the Global Geoscience Societies would like your feedback and insights on geoscience career opportunities. If you are a student or an early career professional in the geosciences, visit the link in the chat to participate in this 10-minute survey. Finally, thank you everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.